The marketing departments are fabulous at selling you the best face of the facility when you go the first time. But it's important to also go at night and see what's going on in there. How are they staffed at night? How are they staffed? And what does it smell? And what do you sense with your gut when the marketing director isn't giving you all the talking points about how great the facility is? Those are really important.
Welcome to my podcast. I'm just saying, let's get to the point. I will tell you why I named it that. Because I say it a lot because I get a little sarcastic and I just kind of draw conclusions. And I'm like, I'm just saying, that's just
Right.
what it looks like to me. And when I say, let's get to the point, people take a long time to get to what they really want to say. And we don't have a lot of time. So I want you to say as much as you can that's valuable to our viewers and our listeners. So, especially on seniors and what you do as a trial lawyer. I'm just so curious. I'm a little bit of a podcast junkie, I have to admit. I love learning other points of view and learning why people do what they do. So, why did you get in the field of being a trial attorney representing seniors and going after nursing homes and senior housing facilities? And then tell me what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I don't think of it as going after anybody. I don't think I go after anyone. I think everyone has a calling. I felt like it was mine. Coming out of law school, I was doing a lot of litigation. A lot of it was people who don't get along suing each other. And it felt very stupid to me and unfulfilling. And I thought, look, I have a skill and I don't want to put it to use for two rich people who can't get along. Not that there's anything wrong with somebody having money or having a dispute, but I just didn't like it. Or there's certain things about the law that just don't speak to me. So I wanted, if I'm going to use my time in something that can sometimes be stressful, I wanted it to have meaning. And I didn't like the idea of being in the personal injury world because it's so saturated and it doesn't speak to me. I can't do it. This was something at that time no one really wanted to do because it's more difficult than a typical personal injury case. It's more time consuming. It's definitely very emotionally tasking. And so I felt like a win-win. It's something that's rewarding and challenging and definitely a societal need that not everyone wants to do or not doesn't want to do. Not everyone wants to do for the right reasons. And what started as a dabbling and in the beginning, it was more like as a marketing, hey, this is what we do. This was back in 2008, and this is all we do. The first few years, I realized this is all in the world of law. This is all I really want to do. If I'm going to practice law, I don't really want to do anything else. And so it just grew from there into being blessed really by God to be able to do it until now, to be given the opportunities that I've been given and the clients that have been sent our way. So that's sort of, people ask me, why did you get into that? That's the answer in a nutshell.
When you did go back to when you started and you did one of your first cases that you won, tell me a little bit about what was happening, what made it so fulfilling in that case for you to go, I'm so in on representing this clientele. Tell me a little bit of that story.
Yeah, it's a very underserved segment of the population. It's not sexy to do these kinds of cases. It's not entertainment law or it's not something high profile. But when I started on the first few cases, a couple of them were actually class actions having to do with understaffing. And since that time, I've left the class action world alone. I think the individual cases are definitely more fulfilling. But in that case, we had an opportunity to really go peel back the onion about how these entities are structured, how ownership is structured, where the money goes, where the money's coming from. It's our money, it's taxpayer money, and where it goes, it's usually going to build an empire of more facilities and more facilities that are milked for management fees, data processing fees, marketing fees, consultant fees. So it's essentially taxpayer money that's paid to provide quality care. And in many instances it is, but in the bad performing facilities, they're performing poorly because the money that's coming in is not being used on patient care. It's being used for home office expenses that's used to
What specific facilities? The first facility where you did the class action, was it a senior living facility? Was it a convalescent type facility? What kind of
Right.
facility was it?
So in our experience, we worked with three different facilities. One is just nursing homes, which are known as skilled nursing facilities or SNFs. They are regulated by both federal and state law. It's Title 42, the Federal Code of Federal Regulations. And then there's a lot of state law, Health and Safety Code, Welfare and Institution Code that deals with the quality of care in nursing homes. Then the second group is really assisted living. And assisted living is something that has evolved in the last 20 years as well. There's a lot of, there's a wide spectrum of facilities that are assisted living. There's small board and cares that are 4 person or 6 person facilities, really homes that are used as a facility. And then there's large homes with 100 beds or 200 beds. And then there's chains of homes. And that's kind of where it gets tricky because it's a lot of private equity money that comes in or REITs that come in and buy up these homes and operate them really as cash cows, unfortunately. And then there is a world that we just recently got very deeply into, which is the world of adult residential facilities. Those are for adults, usually young adults with developmental disabilities. But most of our experience has been in the nursing home, or it's called SNF, skilled nursing facility, nursing home setting or assisted living setting. And I think one of the saddest things is the missed opportunities of people who could. A lot of times people can't. They age at home. The family does the best that they can. I've had clients like that. I remember the very first case we had. It was a very special family. I know the family. They all but worshiped their mother. And they treated her like a queen for many years with Alzheimer's. And it got to the point where they just could not safely keep her at home with all the caregivers and all the attention that they were providing. And they were very severely betrayed by the nursing home that they placed her in. And it was a disaster. But what's sad is the missed opportunities for people to age in place. I think it's, if we can even have a net effect of 5% of people who are placed in assisted living or nursing homes can somehow find a way to age in place at home, I think it's a major societal good. Um,
How do you do that? Because it seems, in my opinion, and I speak from a very small fragment, is I know the stats on what's happening to our aging population. It's growing exponentially. There are not enough facilities to take care of our seniors that are aging. I think it's 40% of the population is going to be seniors over the next 20 years, and there aren't enough facilities. There's not enough money to take care of them, and just personal experience on they try. I don't think all of them, I don't want to ever group somebody into one pot, but it is about money, and it's very expensive to have someone come into your home and care for your loved one 24/7. And I'm like, how do you fix that? How do you, because so many seniors, they want to just stay home and be taken care of and not
right.
leave their home.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I agree with you. I don't think we should put everyone in one basket. I think there are definitely good facilities out there. I know people who run facilities, and contrary to some in the plaintiff attorneys world, not all nursing home or assisted living owners are evil. It doesn't work that way. A lot
No.
of them are small business people who are running a small business. But that aside, I think unfortunately, no matter what, you're going to always deal with the human element of greed. It's the biggest test we have as human beings is how do we treat the blessings we have in this world? How do we treat other people? Do we treat them as cash cows or do we treat them as opportunities to do good and to receive good? So that element will always be there, and I really do believe if we turned facilities over to the government, dare I say that things would be worse because I don't think government can fix things that the private sector can't. But in terms of your question of how do you do that, I think it starts with more education and knowledge when people are in their middle ages before you get to that point. As people think a lot about investing in pensions or retirement plans or IRAs or having a savings, I think part of it's a cultural change that we have to undergo, that part of the savings that we save for is having enough money to be able to stay at home age in place or age in place with family or with family support or with caregiver support. Fortunately, there are a lot of, especially for folks on Medi-Cal, there's things such as in-home support services where family members can step in and care for loved ones and receive compensation from the government. There are a lot of home health agencies, but sometimes it's not enough to check in on people only 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes it's really necessary for there to be 24/7 supervision. So I understand it's not for everyone. Not everyone can afford it. But I think it's something to at least be cognizant of earlier on in people's careers in their lives as they plan for retirement. How can we structure our savings and our investments in a way where we can be closer to family and we can have a home that we can continue to live in that's accessible and that we can have enough savings to bring in home support at home. Because the worst thing is it's not ideal to be in any of these settings in an assisted living or definitely in a nursing home setting. But a lot of times it's not practical otherwise. A lot of times there's really no other choice. I do still think it's important to have those conversations about what can we do to have a plan in place so that we can maximize the amount of time to stay at home as we age.
I think ultimately it winds up that they stay at home as long as they can, but I think in a lot of cases the care that they need just is so much more than what a family member can actually do, and that's where you need
Correct.
that skilled person to come into the house. Tell me a little bit about what are some, so say that a family's at a crossroads and now they've done everything they can at home, like your client, they love their mom, they did everything possible, but they ultimately had to put her in a facility. What were some of the red flags? What was happening that people should be on the lookout for? Because there's really good people out there. The people taking care of my mom right now are phenomenal. And but then there's the red flags. What are those red flags?
There's a lot of public information, especially because of recent, I think, legislation in the last 10 years or so, where owners of nursing homes have to disclose their names. So there are public sites, there's information available on websites where people can look up ownership information and then see if the home is part of a chain. And I would dare to say the larger the chain, the more facilities on that list of other facilities owned by the same owner, the bigger red flag that is, because that shows you that this is a empire building exercise, an empire of nursing homes, rather than let's give quality care to people. Because the only way to build more and to add more facilities to their arsenal is if they are taking money out that's being paid by the government to provide quality care, and they're using it to pay themselves through various schemes so they can buy more facilities, so they can service more facilities, so they can make more money. So that's the first thing to look at. Is this part of a big chain? Secondly, there could be facilities based on locality. They could be part of a chain, but they could still have good staff and be properly staffed. So the number one thing people can do is go on it's called a Medicare Compare, Medicare.gov website, where you can look up a citation history and a star rating. There's a 5-star rating for facilities. You can see how many stars it has, and there's different categories. You can see how many stars they have for staffing. You definitely don't want to place someone in a facility that has a very low star rating for staffing. They have quality ratings for incidents such as pressure injuries or bed sores or rehospitalization. So there's definitely that public information. Then there's also, here in California, there's the California Department of Public Health does an annual survey of each facility. They do it on behalf of Medicare. And then if a family member or a resident complains about a certain issue, then the investigator also comes in to investigate complaints. So the annual surveys are a little bit biased because they happen annually and the administrators can anticipate when the next survey is coming. And so they staff up and they make the place look clean and nice and everything's in order because they know the investigators are coming. I've seen this in litigation in emails where the owners are telling their administrators, okay, we have inspections, annual inspections coming up. It's time to staff up. And then after that, we rock. It's just, I've seen it in my own, I've seen a lot of things and the way these facilities are run and operated, but you can still have some sort of into how things operate inside the facility by looking at their deficiency or citation history. If a when the inspector comes in and they see that certain state or federal regulations are not being followed, they issue deficiencies, and then the facility has to submit a plan of correction and explain how they're going to correct that deficiency. It's usually through training and additional policies and training on their policies. Sometimes when things are really bad, when there's egregious neglect and it leads to a serious injury or something worse, that's when it gets to citations. Citation is higher than a deficiency, and there's a class A, class AA citation, class B. So there's different classes of citations. The information is available online. And obviously, you want to pick a facility that has less citations and less deficiencies. But there's really no substitute for touring different facilities at different times of the day. The marketing departments are fabulous at selling you the best face of the facility when you go the first time. But it's important to also go at night and see what's going on in there. How are they staffed at night? How are they staffed? And what does it smell like? And what do you sense with your gut when the marketing director isn't giving you all the talking points about how great the facility is? Those are really important. And if at all possible, I think no matter where someone selects, and this is really the hardest part, is there's no substitute for trying to be around as much as possible, because knowing that you're watching, knowing that you're there certainly does make a difference in the level of care. It's human nature. When you know someone's watching, you do your job better. It's just how it is.
When families put their loved ones in these facilities, what are some of the things like staffing? How do you know if somebody's got enough staffing? Is there something, if you're walking through a facility and you go, oh, it's nice, it's clean, the nurses are friendly, and then 3 days later, mom hasn't been turned and she's in poor health, how can someone just visually see that there's enough staffing? Is there a ratio? Is there something they should be looking for?
Sure. So actually, here in California, there is a nursing hour per patient day ratio of it. Right now, it's the minimum is 3.55. So, for example, if you have for every resident that you have in the facility, you have to log in 3.55 hours by direct caregivers. That's either an RN or an LVN or a CNA. So the staffing ratios are supposed to be posted daily, and if you go online, if the facility was cited or received a deficiency for being understaffed, that would be available online. And you could also look at if you go to the Medicare.gov website and you follow the nursing home compare prompts, you can put in certain zip codes or names of facilities, and you could see how their staff rating, the star system, how many stars they have for their staffing, and how that compares to other facilities. But to answer your question, it's really an instinct thing, right? You show up, you spend an hour in there, you walk the floors, and you see how full they are, how many residents there are in there. If you'll have a good sense of whether there's enough people walking around who are actually working and helping people or not. You can talk to the staff about, sometimes they'll share with you if people are overwhelmed, underpaid, and frustrated. They will share their experiences. But really, most of the issues happen at night, when even an understaffed facility is more severely understaffed at night. And sometimes when facilities, a lot of the cases we have are when the facility is always trying to run by the minimum ratio, because that's what they have to do. They have to do the minimum. And so sometimes people call out, and because they're only staffed at the minimum, or someone doesn't show up to work, suddenly they're below the minimum much of the time, because it's natural that sometimes people don't show up to work. And that happens a lot.
And
Just on that stuff.
are they just hoping that no one's going to find out that they were understaffed that night so that they can just kind of get through it and that's what really gets them in trouble?
That's pretty much what it is. And I think part of the problem is that the minimum is just the minimum. There's another statute that says you have to staff based on acuity. So acuity means the overall physical, psychological needs of the resident. And so you have to actually, if, for example, the resident population in total requires a minimum nursing hour per patient day ratio of 4 instead of 3.55, then 4 is what you have to provide. Now, the devil is in the details, and the argument is about what's the acuity, but generally you can sense that. For example, if a facility has a lot of Medicare patients and they have a higher proportion of Medicare patients than other patients, like if, let's say, more than 30% of their resident population is Medicare, that's usually a higher acuity or higher need, because usually Medicare patients who are in a facility are post surgery and they need a lot of rehab and they're high need and they need a lot of help. So the more high need residents there are in a facility, the more weight that puts on the existing staff and the less attention is paid to the rest of the residents that are in the facility. The problem is the high acuity, high need patients are what drives the highest reimbursement, because the higher the acuity, the higher the need, the more the government pays for the patient to be there. So the play is to fill the facility with as many high acuity residents who need a lot of help and to hire as low as staff as you can, because labor is the highest cost of running a facility.
So when a patient goes into one of these facilities, do they have the ability to get out of this facility? If you're being paid by Medicare, Medi-Cal, and all of those, are there rules for these patients to say, look, we don't like it here, it's not working for my family? Can they pull them out, or does the patient lose services because the family's not happy with the facility?
It's a catch 22 because sometimes patients are very unhappy, but the solution isn't to go home. The solution is to get the care that the government is paying for them to receive. But the facility is clearly not providing that. So there are families who will take their loved ones home or back to the hospital or to a different facility, and they certainly have the right to do that. Sometimes you need a physician consent to do that. And sometimes people do that against medical advice if they don't get the write-off from the physician, but they certainly have that
But if
as
they
residents.
don't, but if they don't get the authorization, can that affect the benefits that the patient is getting so that they can afford to be in a facility like that?
If they're in a facility, the government is paying for them to be there. If they discharge themselves from the facility will not continue to get paid for them to be there. But if they still have a certain number of Medicare days left, they can certainly go to a different facility and then assign their reimbursement to that facility. So I don't think they lose their rights. So the problem is it's limited. Usually Medicare pays either for 90 or 100 days, and then it runs out. And so there's a lot of sort of pressure to get people in. And then when the Medicare days runs out, there's a lot of pressure to discharge them home. And then if they cannot do that, so if they're eligible for Medi-Cal, then they can continue to reside in the facility, and Medi-Cal will continue to pay for them being there, or they have to switch to private pay, which is very expensive. It could cost something between $15,000 to $20,000 a month to stay in a nursing home with private pay.
What happens, because we talk about a lot Medicaid, Medi-Cal, but what happens to these private facilities? Is it the same issues in these private facilities as there are in some of these bigger chain facilities that count on Medi-Cal and Medicare and everything?
That's a great question. So most assisted living facilities, or they're licensed as RCFE, or residential care facility for the elderly. They're private pay. Some people have long-term insurance that helps cover some of the costs, but it's still private pay. So it's not Medicare. Medicare certainly doesn't cover it. There are some facilities that have what's called an assisted living waiver program, where people on Medi-Cal can have a portion of their Medi-Cal benefits paid to the facility to house them in that facility. That's become a bigger thing here in California over the last 10 years. But typically speaking, if somebody is going into a big fancy building and it looks very nice and there's a lot of services advertised, and they may very well receive that. Many times people do. Your question is a great one. The biggest challenge I've learned in the last 20 years of doing this in an assisted living facility is when the care needs of the resident are higher than what the facility has a license to accept. So sometimes people have needs that are higher than what an assisted living is licensed to provide. There are certain services that the person needs. Let's say, for
Can you
example,
give me an example? Sorry, I think I
yeah,
interrupted you. I was like, can you give me an example?
absolutely,
Like
yeah,
what would
absolutely.
happen?
So I'll give you one example is, let's say the facility doesn't have a memory care unit, or let's say they have a memory care unit, but it's full. And now they have a resident that they brought in, he or she's been there for 2 or 3 months. And now clearly that resident has dementia. So she has a higher elopement risk. she has a higher fall risk. She needs greater supervision so she doesn't hurt herself. If the facility were completely honest with the family and came to the family and said, we can no longer safely care for your loved one, the facility stands to then lose whatever monthly rent that family or that person is paying for the resident to be there. This happens actually a lot with residents who decline over time after they are admitted to a facility, and they suffer either a lot of falls because they're not supposed to be alone in a room by themselves. They need a higher level of care. They need 24/7 supervision. They're a high fall risk. Or somebody who's become bedbound and develops bed sores or pressure injuries. So there's different stages to bed sores. If anything reaches a stage 3 or higher, which means that essentially there's a breakdown in the skin where not only has the skin been broken, but now there's tissue and muscle loss. It's a very dangerous thing because it's a gateway to infections, and it's very painful, and it can lead to a blood infection and untimely death. When someone reaches that stage, they're no longer a candidate to be in an assisted living because an assisted living cannot care for someone with a stage 3 or greater bed sore. And sometimes they get around that, and we found a lot of cases where they get around that by essentially putting the person on hospice, because if the person is on hospice, then they can continue to stay in an assisted living even if they have a stage 3 or higher. So there assisted livings are much less regulated than skilled nursing homes, but there is one specific regulation that's very clear that says it's incumbent on the assisted living facility to assess whether or not they can continue to provide the care and services that the resident needs. And if the assisted living facility determines that it cannot continue to provide that level of care and services safely, it's incumbent on the facility to notify the resident and his or her family members that they can no longer accept them there. That's where a lot of issues happen. It's because, again, that human element of greed comes in. Let's wait a little bit, maybe it'll get better. Or sometimes outright fraud. I've seen cases where somebody was on a Medicare Advantage program and they were living in a fancy facility, and through neglect, this gentleman had MS, and through neglect, after he was bedbound, he developed a very large bed sore. And the Medicare Advantage, the case manager from the Medicare Advantage company, and I saw the emails, it was a clear fraud, conspired with the administrator of the facility to underclassify the stage of the bed sore to call it a stage 2, so that they wouldn't have to discharge the patient to the hospital or provide them with a greater level of care. It happens a lot, unfortunately.
That's so sad.
Um, it
That's
is very
terrible.
sad. It's very sad, but it doesn't mean it happens in every facility. It is something for people to look out for, to always be asking that question of, if someone's loved one is in an assisted living, is it the right place for them? And just because the answer was yes yesterday doesn't mean the answer is yes 2 weeks from now. Because especially with the elderly, they can decline not just more rapidly over time, but sometimes suddenly. So that's a question that always has to be on top of mind. And it's actually, I could tell you, in nursing homes, the common denominator in most of our cases is understaffing. In assisted living, understaffing certainly plays a role, but I would say if there's a bigger theme, it's this that we're talking about right now, where it's misplacement. When the resident no longer belongs there or never really belonged there in the first place and should have never been admitted there because he or she has needs that the facility cannot meet.
Do you think a lot of this happens because the people, my brother and I care for my mom, and there's just a lot of history of us doing that. So we've become very well educated and very much my mom's advocate. And I feel like a lot of parents, a lot of elderly don't have an advocate on their side that is a family member that really has their best interest. And then I feel that they have people that have their best interest, but they don't know what to ask. And they're almost, I remember, I'll never forget my dad saying to me, honey, don't make the doctor mad because then he won't be my doctor. And I'm like, there's plenty of doctors, Dad. I'm not worried about making the doctor mad. But I think people don't know what to ask or how to behave when their loved one is sitting there and they know they're not being treated right, Or maybe they are, they just don't understand. And so now they're making a bigger fuss than they need. I think it works both ways.
Yeah, look, it's one of the biggest challenges in any adult's life when parents age and you have a responsibility and an opportunity to care for them, and there's a lot of unknowns, and it can be scary, but people have to the degree possible, families need to make decisions together, plan together, educate themselves, because these it's a scary challenge, but it's not going to go away. And the more attention it's given, the more likely that a more positive result can come about. But yeah, definitely, I think it's a very challenging time, but it's something that calls for a lot of research and just listening to your gut, really feeling things out, listening to your guts to see if, is this the right place? Are these people being honest with me about the level of care? When you show up and you complain about something, is it being addressed or are you being written off? But yeah, it's definitely a big challenge.
Someone,
Personal experience.
if someone needed your services, what would have to be going on where you would say, you know what, you definitely need to come sit in front of me and let's talk through what's happening? What is a red flag for someone listening for them to say, I'm going to pick up the phone and call you and start because I think something's up?
Yeah, so usually people reach out to us. Typically, there's a bed sore or an infection that was neglected, or someone is suffering way too many falls, and then there's fractures or other injuries from a fall. There's head injuries. People are admitted to the hospital dehydrated, malnourished, in unsanitary conditions. And someone usually at the hospital will tell the family member, hey, it looks like this person is being neglected. Or sometimes families visit and they can see it themselves. Those are typically the scenarios where folks give a call to people like us.
Are people that take their find out and hear from somebody at the hospital, when that hospital worker says to a family member, hey, it looks like it's a like they've not been taken care of properly, are they mandated just like kids? They're mandated by the court to say, hey, this is elder abuse, just like child abuse?
Absolutely. So caregivers are what's known as mandated reporters. So if anyone who's working in a hospital and is doing triage and sees somebody coming in with an infected bed sore, there is a form that they have to fill out because they can get in trouble if they don't report it themselves. And so a lot of times we've had families that reached out to us because they became aware that the hospital, as mandated reporters, filed a complaint with Department of Public Health, or in the case of an assisted living, with Department of Social Services as mandated reporters. And that sort of jumpstarts the process of investigation by the family. Hey, what's going on? Asking questions and things of that nature. But
Do
yeah,
you ever have
definitely.
do you ever have cases where it's a family member saying, look it, I don't think that my other family member is taking good care of mom and they're fighting between each other?
I've had those calls, but we respectfully decline to become involved in those cases. It's just not what we do.
It's not what you guys do. You're
It's not what
more the facilities themselves and making
correct.
sure the patients are taken care of.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to talk to you because they feel they need your services, how would someone get in touch with you?
We try always to make our website a source of information where people can actually learn and do research, and our contact and our email, phone numbers are all available publicly. You can call our office, and we have a very dedicated intake team, and we candidly, I act as like the filter for the calls that come in. And it's really sad what we see on a daily basis. And I have to tell you, I probably 95% of the calls that come in, I'll either directly tell the intake team, hey, respectfully decline, or I'll ask some of the team members, what do you think? And a lot of times we end up declining. I think that's just based on experience, based on wanting to make sure if I take on someone's case, I can actually help them. I don't believe in suing for the case just for the sake of suing. I think there's a moral responsibility on our part. Even if we see something bad that happened or a sad outcome, we have to ask why. And then even when we do take a case, there's an initial merit review where we have to get all the medical records and review them. And sometimes if we have a question, We have to hire an expert to tell us, hey, this is the scenario. We know what happened, but why did it happen? Was there a breach in the standard of care? Was there any evidence of neglect? Sometimes you just know that right off the bat, and sometimes you need to do a little bit of research. Most of the time, you need to do a little bit of research to determine that. But we try to do right by everyone. If you are not investigating cases or just filing them just because a bad outcome happened, you're doing a disservice to the entire population because you're clogging up the courts, you're bringing a bad name for plaintiff attorneys, and you're not doing any favors to the family of the person who now has hopes that you can help them, when in fact this is not something that was really neglect or negligence. It's an all around lose lose. So it's really important to just have a very conservative merit review process. That's just the way we do it.
I think that's a human way to do things and an honest way to do things. Thank you so much for your time and coming
Thank
on
you.
here and sharing your good philosophy about taking care of the elderly. I hope things change to where there's more staff and there's more money to take care of the elderly. It might make your job a little bit easier.
I'd be
Maybe.
happy to do. I'd be happy to do something else.
Ben, thank you so much for being on.
Thank
I'm
you.
just saying. I think we got to some really good points, a lot of things that I didn't know about. And I'm glad that you're out there helping the elderly. I'm Robbyn Battles, and I'm just saying, I want to thank you for listening. I hope you'll come back for future episodes and be sure to like, share, and follow. I'm just saying, let's get to the point. I'm Robbyn Battles.